here's the point, ultimately. What are we talking about when we talk about a good society? We're talking about a society that values, each person values other people, tries to treat them well, tries to produce the maximum benefits for the maximum number of people. And that and the notions of Christianity, in some sense, overlap with that, and in some sense don't. But the ultimate reason for doing that is rational. I've gone into many places, including speaking to Islamic groups, and asked the following question. If you stopped believing in God, would you go out and murder your neighbor? Okay? Is it the belief in God that causes you to be moral or righteous? Okay? Would you disobey the many aspects of the Ten Commandments? Murder your neighbor. Would you steal? Would you take your neighbor's goods because God didn't tell you to do that? Would you do that? And almost every time I do that, people point out no, because the reason that they don't do things, regardless of whether they're Christian or not, is because they have a rational view of how you can live in a society which is functional, where people make a social compact to realize that we ultimately give up some freedoms because we live in a society, we have to share that society with others, and therefore we have to find a way to live harmoniously. And all of that comes from a rational view of the world, and that's not Christian. It's not non-Christian either. It's just based on a sense of empathy and sympathy. And as I say, if you did not believe in God, if you ask people, if you gave up that notion of God, would you behave differently? Most people say no.
Okay, so who you heard there was Lawrence Krauss debating Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy on which is better for society, secularism or Christianity. Lawrence Krauss is the atheist here, as you probably inferred by what he was saying. And he was making the point that it's not Christianity that's necessarily better, it's actually rationality. And this is evidenced by the fact that if people stopped believing in God, they wouldn't go out and murder or do harm to their neighbor. So therefore, he concludes that the reason for doing good must not be because God exists, it must be because we have some sense of shared rationality. Now, what's ironic is that for the Muslims, it's their very belief in their God that causes them to go murder people. We won't get into that in this video. In this video, we are going to look at this claim and see how Christians can respond to it, and give you some points as to how you can respond to this if atheists ever bring this point up to you. My name is Ethan. This is Everyday Gospel. I make videos to help bolster your faith, ultimately unto loving the gospel, living and sharing the gospel. Okay, so just a quick review of what Lawrence said is that because Christians and Muslims wouldn't necessarily go kill people or steal from people if we stopped believing in our God, therefore morality is rooted in more than just our belief in God. It's rooted in something deeper, and he says that's rationality. Rationality in philosophy is defined as the quality of being based on or guided by reason, involving the use of logic and evidence to form beliefs and make decisions. So, in essence, he is saying, oh yeah, if people see that, oh, I steal, people don't trust me, I don't have any friends, that's evidence that stealing's bad, I won't steal, I'll teach people not to steal. Oh, I murder, people come after me and want to murder me back, therefore murder's not good, okay, I won't murder. That's kind of how their reasoning goes. So the question is, does this hold up? And yeah, maybe in a micro level, in a very small community, you could argue that people can recognize that they have to give things up for the betterment of the community. However, there are three things I want to expose about this that we're going to go over in this video. Number one is that this argument assumes good and evil. Atheists always do this in a lot of conversations I have with them. They will assume good and evil. And the reason atheists can't assume good and evil is because they can't ground morality in anything objective. You can't say it's wrong to murder people. So he's assuming that, right? When he says, oh, I asked people, would you murder? See, he has to assume that murder is wrong to even ask the question, would you murder? But how do you know murder is wrong? He would say maybe, like I said earlier, because if I murder, someone will come after me and murder me. Maybe, but that doesn't make it wrong. It makes people mad, but people being mad doesn't mean it's wrong, right? So how do you know it's wrong? What are you grounding it in that is letting you know that it's absolutely wrong? And atheists do this a lot. Well, they borrow our morality as theists and as Christians and then assert that other sources from them. So this argument, assuming good and evil exists, is a big problem because atheists cannot ground good and evil objectively like we can. And maybe they would say, oh, the highest good could be to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule. Okay, cool. How about you don't use our book and our sources to ground your morality, and while also rejecting our God? If you're going to use our book, our book came from God. So you got your hands tied there, right? In this case, Lawrence Krauss is saying that the highest good is that the maximum amount of people have the maximum good.
Each person values other people, tries to treat them well, tries to produce the maximum benefits for the maximum number of people.
And the reason is because we live in a society, people know they have to sacrifice for a society, so they're willing to give that up. And, in general, sure, people know they live in a society and they have to sacrifice small things to live in that society. But, however, this leads into my second point, which is societies are limited. What's good for one society doesn't make it good for another society in an atheistic framework. There are thousands of different societies with thousands of different ideas of how to live that they would all consider rational. For example, there's one tribe, I think in current day Indonesia somewhere, where a missionary went. The missionary's name was Don Richardson. He wrote a book. You can read it. He went to go preach to this tribe and found out that they are cannibals and they value treachery. And so for this society, what's rational is to eat other humans and be treacherous. And they're not going to change because they think it's wrong. They don't have a problem with it. So you can't tell them, hey, that's not rational. They would say, actually, it is. And so what caused them to change? It's when they were met with the gospel, they got convicted of their sin, they repented, they turned to Christ, and becoming a Christian brought them to end cannibalism and treachery. And so for the atheists, right, they have no way to tell them you can't be a cannibal because, again, they borrow from our morality. How can you ground that cannibalism's wrong if God doesn't exist? If there's, how do you know? How do you know, right? So societies are limited. That's the second point I would make. And moving on into our third and final point, this position denies reality. This idea sounds nice, that people naturally want the maximum amount of good for the maximum amount of people, but it's just absolutely untrue. It assumes way too much goodwill and intent for people. People don't automatically value the maximum good for the maximum amount of people. That has to be taught. What they do is they grow up and they value the maximum amount of good for themselves. This is why you have people who cheat on tests in school to get ahead. This is why people will lie at work about why they're late so they have a good reputation so they can get a promotion, or they lie about other things in order to excel in their business, or just go drive down the highway at a busy time of day and go the speed limit and watch how many people are mad at you because you're inconveniencing them. These are small examples of people clearly looking out for themselves and not concerned about what's best, quote unquote, for society. Now, in response to this, the atheists could look at all the great work people do, like volunteering at homeless shelters, feeding the hungry, joining relief work when natural disasters happen, and say, see, humans have naturally good instincts in them. And sure, there is something innate in humans that cares for others. I think that's from God. They would think that's just from rationality. But what's kind of confusing is that a lot of people who rush to help in times of trouble, like natural disaster, what's hard is that it's not entirely clear where generational Christian culture ends and natural morality takes over. So an atheist might look at a non-Christian doing a good work in America and say, see, that's just them doing what's good because they know it's rational. And I would say, how can we know that for sure, right? It's not clear that they haven't been influenced by maybe their parents having a nominal Christian upbringing or Christian upbringing, their grandparents being Christians, and everyone in their family for 100+ years being Christian, raising them to care for people, right? So it's like, oh yeah, those good natural things could be learned, or like the good atheistic morality could be culturally learned things, and the culture learned them through Christianity. And so it's kind of like atheistic cultures that care for humans and the maximum good for the maximum amount of people are atheists that come from predominantly Christian cultures, Okay, so in review, the three things that we went over is that this argument assumes good and evil. Atheists have to borrow from theists on what's good and evil because they can't ground objectively what's good and evil. Number two, societies are limited. So what's good for one society doesn't mean it's immediately good for the next society in an atheist idea. And three, this position denies reality. It's just not true that most people care about the most amount of good for the most amount of everyone. They want the most amount of good for themselves. All in all, if you don't take anything else from this video, if you forget those 3 points, one of the biggest problems for atheists is that they can't ground their arguments in morality objectively. They can try to come up with reasons like rationality, but they can't say with absolute certainty where morality comes from. And I think that's a big deal for atheists and one reason why no one should be an atheist. Thank you guys so much for watching this video if you made it to the end. If you appreciate this content and like to know how to bolster your faith and learn about the Bible and give defenses for your faith, so when you're sharing the gospel, you know how to answer, or you even know how to share the gospel if someone asks, go ahead and subscribe and like, please. That would be a huge help trying to encourage people to share their faith, the gospels for every day, not just Sunday. I'm Ethan. This is Everyday Gospel. See ya.